Sarah had always found peace in the library. The smell of old books, the stillness of the air, and the faint rustle of pages had always calmed her restless mind. That night, however, the library was different. It wasn't the bustling daytime sanctuary of students. It was an empty, echoing husk. The university library was enormous, 3 floors high, with winding corridors, endless rows of shelves, and a basement archive that few dared to enter after dark. Sarah had agreed to help her professor organize rare books in preparation for a historical exhibition. It was meant to be simple. Cart books from the main section, log them in the computer, and place them into the restricted archive. Easy, right? She entered at 10 RPM, and the security guard joked on her way in. "Don't let the ghosts keep you." She laughed it off but felt an involuntary chill settle on her spine. By midnight, the library seemed alive in a way it never did during the day. The lamps glowed dimly, creating long shadows that stretched across the floor. The heating system had clicked off, making the air icy. Every sound, her footsteps, the creak of her cartwheels, even the flutter of a moth near a bulb, echoed endlessly. As she slid a stack of books into place, she heard it, a faint murmur. At first, she thought it was the sound of the pipes or maybe wind pressing against the old glass windows. But then it came again, soft, hushed, like a voice from a few feet away. Sarah froze, listening. Ara. It was her name. She spun toward the nearest aisle. Nothing. Just a row of dusty books with cracked spines, their titles barely legible. The library was empty. She was certain of it. Trying to shake the unease, she muttered, "I've been here too long," and pushed the cart deeper into the restricted section. The air grew colder the further she went, and soon she could see her own breath in faint wisps. She rubbed her arms for warmth but felt no relief. The whispers came again, clearer, stronger, this time layered as though multiple voices were speaking all at once. Some were urgent, some sad, some angry. Her skin crawled as the voices overlapped, echoing words she couldn't quite understand. She pulled out her phone, hoping to use the flashlight, but the screen flickered, distorted, and died. The battery was gone, though she had charged it just an hour before. She tapped the screen desperately, but nothing. The whispers continued. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed nearby. A book had fallen from the top shelf on its own. Then another, and another. The sound filled the silence as heavy tomes dropped onto the wooden floor. Sarah backed away as one book flipped open on its own, its brittle pages fluttering as though an invisible hand was rifling through them. Her heart hammered as the whispering grew louder, forming a single coherent sentence. "Get out before you join us." Panic surged through her chest. She turned and ran, her shoes pounding against the wooden floor, the sound ricocheting off the tall shelves. But something ran with her. She could hear footsteps behind her, fast, heavy, closing in. She didn't dare look back, but she could feel the pressure of something just inches away, as though its shadow overlapped her own. The overhead lamps flickered, plunging the aisles into darkness before buzzing back to life. For a split second, Sarah thought she saw shapes standing between the shelves, pale outlines of figures staring directly at her. She barreled through the front doors and stumbled outside into the cold night air, gasping. The moment she crossed the threshold, the whispers stopped. The silence was absolute, broken only by her ragged breathing. Her phone flickered back to life in her hand. She nearly dropped it when she saw the notification. One new voice recording saved. Hands trembling, she pressed play. The recording wasn't the whispers she had heard. It was her own voice, hoarse, urgent, and distorted. "Get out before you join us." Sarah dropped the phone, her blood running cold. The library loomed behind her, silent and dark. But she swore even from outside she could see the faintest glow deep inside the aisles, like eyes watching, waiting. Daniel had worked as the city library's night janitor for almost a decade. He liked the solitude, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights, and the rhythm of his nightly routine. Most nights were predictable, sweeping the halls, dusting the shelves, emptying the trash. He liked it that way. But there was one part of the library he had never touched, the locked reading room. The door stood at the far end of the west wing, its brass knob tarnished with age, its wood scarred and blackened near the bottom. For years, Daniel had walked past it without thinking much. The older librarians always told newcomers the same thing. Don't bother with that room, it's sealed. They said the fire decades ago had ruined it, though the flames had barely scarred the rest of the library. But the whispers Daniel overheard in the staff lounge were different. They said someone had died in there that night. A patron. A man who got trapped when the flames spread too quickly. Some said he had been asleep, some said he had been reading. Others claimed he'd locked himself inside on purpose. No one ever agreed, but everyone agreed on this. After the fire, the room was never the same. One late night in winter, Daniel was finishing his shift when the new head librarian, Ms. Kane, called him over. She was brisk, no nonsense, and hated superstition, as she put it. That reading room hasn't been touched in years, she said, tossing him a heavy brass key. Sweep it out, mop the floors, dust the shelves. I want it opened for inventory. Daniel hesitated. I thought it was condemned. Her expression hardened. It's just a room, nothing more. But as Daniel stood before the door, key in hand, he felt a pit of unease in his stomach. He'd passed this door hundreds of times before, but now the silence pressed heavier, as though the hallway itself was holding its breath. The key slid in with an audible click, the bolt groaned, and the door creaked open. The smell hit him first, a pungent mix of smoke and mold, as if the air inside hadn't moved in years. He stepped inside, flicking on the light. A single bulb overhead buzzed to life, throwing weak, sickly light across the room. Dust drifted in the air like ash, and the shadows seemed to cling to the corners. The walls were blackened in patches where flames had once licked, though the shelves themselves were intact. Daniel pushed his mop bucket forward, but his steps echoed unnaturally loud. He paused, listening. It felt like the room was larger than it should have been, like the sound traveled farther than the walls allowed. He tried to ignore it and went about his routine. Sweep, mop, dust. That was when he noticed the chair. It sat in the far corner, half burned, one leg blackened and warped by fire. On the seat lay an open book. Daniel frowned. There shouldn't have been anything left behind. Carefully, he approached. The book wasn't a novel or reference, it was a ledger. A thick, leather-bound tome filled with names in neat, looping handwriting. Most of the pages were scorched, the ink smeared and unreadable. But the last few entries were pristine. Names. Dozens of them. None Daniel recognized. His brow furrowed as he flipped forward, only to freeze when he reached the last line. It was his name. Daniel's throat went dry. His hand trembled as he traced the ink, still wet as if it had been written only moments earlier. He dropped the book onto the desk, the echo startlingly loud. That was when he heard it. A faint scratching, like a pen moving across paper. Slowly, Daniel turned. At the center desk of the reading room, a figure sat hunched over, its back to him. The shadow was thick, its edges blurry, like smoke contained in the shape of a man. Its arm moved steadily, scratching across a blank page with a pen that wasn't there. The temperature dropped. Daniel's breath came out in pale clouds, each exhale loud in the silence. His instincts screamed at him to leave, and he bolted for the door. But when he grabbed the handle and twisted, nothing. The door refused to open. He pulled harder, slammed his shoulder into it, even kicked. It didn't budge. Behind him, the scratching grew louder, faster, more frantic. He spun back to see the ledger on the desk filling with his name. Again and again. Each line identical, written with impossible speed. His chest tightened. Smoke began to leak from the cracks between the floorboards, rising in thick coils that stung his eyes. The faint smell of burning wood became overwhelming, and the walls themselves began to darken, blistering with phantom heat. He could hear voices now, screams, dozens of them echoing through the smoke, men, women, children, all wailing, pleading, trapped in invisible flames. The shadow at the desk stopped writing. Slowly, its head lifted. Daniel staggered back, pressing against the sealed door. The figure turned toward him. Its face was not a face at all, but a hollow void of smoke, its mouth gaping unnaturally wide. Ash poured from it in heavy clouds, filling the room until Daniel was choking, coughing violently, vision blurring. He pounded on the door one last time before collapsing to the floor. The next moment he was outside. The door swung open violently, and he fell into the hall gasping for clean air. The smoke dissipated instantly, vanishing as though it had never been there. Behind him, the room was silent. Dark. Empty. The chair was gone. The ledger was gone. The desk was bare. The next morning, the head librarian found him pale and shaken. He handed her the key without a word. When she asked what had happened, he muttered, "It doesn't want to be opened," and walked out. He never came back. Weeks later, during a cataloging session, one of the assistants found something in the archive basement. A ledger, half-burned, pages brittle. On the last page, scrawled in fresh black ink over and over again, was the same name: Daniel. The Central City Library was a grand building, 3 stories of carved stone and tall windows that glowed with golden light during the day. Students loved it, researchers depended on it, and even casual readers came for its quiet, peaceful halls. But there was one part of the library almost no one spoke about: the basement archives. The archives stretched beneath the main building like a labyrinth. Narrow aisles of shelves groaned with the weight of newspapers, journals, and forgotten government records stacked decade upon decade. The air was damp, the lights flickered, and the pipes along the ceiling rattled with every gust of wind outside. Most librarians refused to go down there alone. They sent interns or janitors instead, always with vague excuses about allergies or time. But the truth was whispered in private. People heard things in the basement. Elise was the kind of person who didn't scare easily. She was young, ambitious, newly hired as an assistant librarian. When her supervisor asked her to fetch a medical journal from the archives late one night, she agreed without hesitation. "Row 12, Section C, Shelf 3, her supervisor instructed. "It should be on the bottom, but don't linger down there. The lights go out sometimes." Elise smiled, thinking it was a joke, and grabbed her flashlight just in case. The descent into the basement was colder than she expected. Each step on the concrete stairs echoed like a drumbeat in the stairwell, and when she opened the heavy metal door, the sound seemed to vanish into a thick silence. She flicked her flashlight on. The beam cut across endless rows of shelves, each one crowded with boxes and binders coated in dust. A faint, musty smell clung to the air, tinged with something metallic. "Row 12, she whispered to herself, trying to stay calm. She walked slowly, the soles of her shoes slapping against the cement floor. The further she went, the more the silence pressed on her ears. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt unnatural, heavy, as if the air itself was listening. At row 10 she froze. Somewhere ahead she heard whispering. Not the creak of pipes or rustle of rats, these were voices, faint but distinct, weaving in and out of each other, too soft to understand but unmistakably human. Her pulse quickened. She switched off her flashlight, holding her breath. The darkness was suffocating. The whispers continued, moving between the shelves, closer now. She fumbled to turn the light back on. The beam illuminated nothing but dust and paper. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. The whispers stopped. Her footsteps sounded far too loud as she hurried down the rows. At last, she reached row 12. She found section C, shelf 3, and crouched low to retrieve the journal. Relief surged when her flashlight beam landed on it. A worn, leather-bound medical journal, fragile with age. But her relief vanished when she noticed the shelf just below. There was only one item on it, a book that didn't belong. Its cover was blackened, edges curled as though burned. It pulsed faintly in the beam, almost as if it absorbed the light. Against her better judgment, Elise pulled it free. The pages were warped, brittle, and filled with names. Hundreds of them written in messy, frantic handwriting. As she flipped through, her breath caught in her throat. The last page was filled with one phrase, scrawled over and over again in ink that looked disturbingly fresh. "Don't look up." Something wet hit the page. Elise frowned and touched it with her finger. Warm, sticky, red. Blood. Her heart raced. Slowly, against the warning screaming inside her, Elise tilted her head upward. Clinging to the ceiling above the shelf was a figure. Its limbs were unnaturally long, stretched like ropes of shadow. Its torso twisted at impossible angles, as though broken and reassembled. Its head hung upside down, pale eyes glowing faintly white. And from its jagged, too wide mouth, blood dripped steadily onto the book in her hands. It blinked, and then it began to crawl. Elise screamed and bolted, dropping both books. Her flashlight beam darted wildly across the rows as she ran. The whispers erupted again, louder this time, no longer hushed but frantic, filling the air with hundreds of overlapping voices. Some begged, some wailed, some laughed. The creature scraped across the ceiling above her, moving faster than she thought possible, its limbs bending at angles that defied nature. Every time her light caught a glimpse of it, she saw it closer, its jaw unhinging wider, its fingers digging into the concrete ceiling like claws. She sprinted toward the stairs, lungs burning, tears stinging her eyes. The metal door was in sight. She reached it, just as it slammed shut in her face. Panic surged. She pounded on the door with both fists, screaming, "Help! Somebody, please!" Her cries echoed, but no footsteps came from above. Behind her, the whispering stopped all at once. The silence was crushing. She turned slowly, flashlight trembling. The shelves stretched in endless rows, the beam catching nothing. Then, just at the edge of the light, two pale eyes blinked open. They blinked again, then another pair, and another. Dozens of them. The ceiling above her was covered in eyes. The next morning, the security guard found the basement door unlocked. Elise's flashlight lay cracked at the bottom of the stairs. The journal she had been sent to retrieve was neatly stacked on the desk upstairs, though no one admitted to carrying it there. And in row 12, section C, shelf 3, the blackened book sat in place again. Its last page bore a new entry, written in fresh black ink. Elise looked up. Libraries are supposed to feel safe. They're sanctuaries of silence, of order, of knowledge neatly bound in pages. But sometimes, silence can feel less like peace and more like a weight pressing down on your chest. At the Oak Ridge Public Library, the silence in one corner was different, heavier. It was the farthest section in the back, past the history shelves and reference journals. That's where he always sat. The patron no one knew by name. He never borrowed books, never asked questions. He didn't even seem to read in the conventional sense. He simply sat in the same chair, night after night, with a thick, cracked leather tome open on his lap. Staff swore they never saw him enter. They'd glance up during late shifts and he'd just be there, waiting. No one confronted him directly, not after what happened years ago. Julia was new. She was fresh out of school, excited to start her first job as a librarian. The building itself fascinated her. Vaulted ceilings, tall glass windows, rows upon rows of shelves that seemed to stretch into eternity. But when her co-workers told her about the patron who never left, she laughed it off. "Every old building has a ghost story," she said. Margaret, one of the senior librarians, leaned closer. Her voice was low and flat. "It's not a ghost story, it's a warning." The first time Julia saw him was during a late shift. She was shelving books near the back when she felt it, that prickling sensation on her neck, like someone was watching. Turning, she spotted him in the far corner, an elderly man in a tattered gray suit. His posture was stiff, his head bent low over the book. The lamplight never seemed to touch his face. Julia hesitated, then walked closer, rehearsing her professional smile. "Sir, we'll be closing in 15 minutes. The man didn't move, didn't even flick his eyes toward her. Julia took another step and noticed something strange about the book. The pages were blank, every single one. Yet his hand moved rhythmically, turning them one after another, as if following words only he could see. "Sir?" she asked again. His head tilted upward slightly. She finally caught a glimpse of his face. His eyes were pale, cloudy white like old milk glass. His skin looked paper-thin, grayish, stretched over sharp bones. And then he smiled. "You shouldn't be here after dark," he whispered. Julia stumbled back. Her flashlight shook in her hand. But when she blinked, the chair was empty. The book was gone. Julia didn't mention it the next morning. She told herself it was stress, fatigue, a trick of shadows. But that night, when she returned for another closing shift, she felt it before she even saw him, that heavy silence. She forced herself to finish her duties, dusting shelves, organizing carts, checking locks. And yet when she turned toward the back corner, he was there again. Same chair, same blank book, same slow turning of empty pages. Her breath caught. She didn't call out this time. She didn't move closer. She simply left him there and hurried her lockup, the sound of those phantom pages turning echoing in her ears long after she shut the doors. The weeks passed. Julia noticed other librarians avoiding the back section during night shifts. She pressed one of them for answers, but they all gave the same excuse. "We don't go there after hours." Only Margaret ever explained more. "He's always been here," Margaret said one evening, her face pale in the lamplight. "Even before the library was built, this land belonged to a man who never left. He collected books, filled journals with stories no one else could read. When the library was built, people started seeing him again, always in the same spot, always with his book." Julia frowned. "So, what is he, a ghost?" Margaret didn't blink. "He's worse than a ghost. Ghosts fade. He doesn't." Julia tried to ignore it, but the old man was always there during her late shifts. Some nights she caught glimpses of him before the lights flickered. Other times, she swore she saw him move between aisles when her back was turned. And each time, the blank pages seemed to whisper silently in the stillness, as if words were forming in the cracks of the paper. Then came the storm. The rain battered the windows, thunder rattled the walls, Most of the staff went home early, but Julia drew the short straw. She had to lock up. She hurried her routine, nerves already frayed by the howling wind outside. But when she entered the back reading area, she froze. The old man wasn't alone. Every chair was filled. Dozens of figures sat silently, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. Each held an open blank book on their laps, their hands moving in eerie unison as they turned invisible pages. The room smelled of damp paper and something sour, like decay. At the center sat the old man. His head lifted and his pale eyes locked onto Julia's trembling form. His smile widened. "You stayed too long," he whispered. Julia dropped her flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, cutting eerie angles of light through the room. She bolted, sprinting for the exit. But as she passed the rows, she realized the figures weren't just sitting anymore. They were standing. Their heads turned in perfect synchronization, following her as she ran. Pages flapped soundlessly from their blank books, scattering across the floor like dead leaves. Julia reached the front doors, fumbling with her keys, heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She threw the doors open and staggered into the storm, rain soaking her hair and clothes. Behind her, the silence broke into a chorus of whispers. Not one voice, hundreds, all calling her name. She didn't look back. The next morning, the head librarian arrived to find the building quiet. Everything looked normal, except the back reading room. On the table where the old man always sat, there was an open book. The pages weren't blank anymore. They told a story. Julia's story. Her name repeated over and over again, written in pale gray ink. On the final page, a single line stood out in dark, fresh script. Julia never left. The Oak Ridge Library had a reputation for its size, its architecture, and its history. But there was something else. A small detail almost everyone overlooked. Near the reference desk stood a massive oak cabinet, 30 drawers high, each handle tarnished with age. It looked more like an antique dresser than part of the catalog system. It was the Master Index, a remnant of the pre-digital era. Decades ago, it had been the lifeline of the library, guiding patrons to shelves and sections before computers made the work easier. But in recent years, the cabinet had been abandoned, left untouched in the shadows. Still, the librarians never threw it away. They said it belonged to the building, that some things in Oak Ridge weren't meant to be removed. Julia had always found the cabinet eerie, though she didn't know why. She avoided walking too close during her shifts, and when she dusted it, she never opened the drawers. The handles were cold, even in summer, and the wood seemed to hum faintly if you pressed your ear against it. One evening, near closing, a graduate student came to her desk. His eyes were tired, his voice flat. "The digital catalog doesn't have what I need," he said, "but the index does." Julia blinked. "The index?" He gestured toward the oak cabinet. "Yes, some books aren't listed anywhere else." Julia frowned. No one had used it in years, and yet the way he said it left no room for argument. Against her better judgment, she crossed to the cabinet. She pulled one drawer open cautiously, expecting faded cards and yellowed paper. Instead, the cards inside looked freshly typed, crisp, clean, as though someone had made them yesterday. The first card she pulled listed a harmless book, Collected Works of Shakespeare, Volume 2, but the further she shuffled, the stranger the titles became. The Bones Beneath the Stacks, Whispers in the Reading Room, the last breath of Elise. Her heart skipped. Elise had been a co-worker who vanished only weeks ago. And then she found the card that made her blood turn cold. It read, "The Cursed Index, Row 0, Shelf 0. There was no row 0, no shelf 0. "Sometimes," the student said softly behind her, "you find the books that aren't meant to exist." Julia spun around, but the student was gone. The library was empty. That night, Julia couldn't stop thinking about the card. The storm outside rattled her apartment windows, but it wasn't thunder keeping her awake. It was the memory of those strange titles and of Elise's name. She tossed and turned until the early hours, and when she finally gave in, she returned to the library. The building was locked, the lights dim. Yet the moment she stepped inside, the air was charged, as if the library had been waiting for her. She approached the oak cabinet again. This time the drawers began to open by themselves, one after another, sliding out with heavy groans, the cards inside rustling like dry leaves in the wind. A single card rose into the air and hovered before her. Julia's trembling hand reached out. Her name, Morris Julia, row 12, section C, shelf 3. Her breath hitched. That was the exact location of the blackened book she'd found in the basement weeks ago. No, she whispered, backing away. The card drifted back into the drawer on its own, but the drawers didn't stop. They yawned open wider, spilling hundreds of cards across the floor. At first, they scattered randomly. Then slowly they rearranged themselves, sliding across the tiles, forming words. You belong to us. The air grew thick with whispers. Julia clutched her ears, but the voices grew louder, pouring from every drawer, every card. Titles, names, death dates. Some she recognized. Margaret, her co-workers, even her own family. Figures emerged from the aisles, ghostly patrons with hollow eyes, clutching cards to their chests like sacred texts. The air smelled of mildew, of rot, of burned paper. And at their center, leading them, was the old man in the gray suit. He extended a skeletal hand. The index keeps records of everyone, he whispered. It does not forget, and it does not forgive. Julia ran. The drawers slammed shut all at once, the echo booming like a gunshot. The figures followed, their whispers rising into a deafening roar. Pages from invisible books fluttered through the air, sticking to her arms and face, words crawling across her skin like ink. She reached the doors and clawed at the locks, but the cards on the floor slid again, rearranging into new words. You never leave. The doors refused to open. When the head librarian arrived the next morning, everything was silent. The building was in order, except the oak cabinet. Its top drawer sat half open, a single card sticking out. It read, Morris Julia, checked out. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.